Hello, and welcome to Engineering with Rosie Live. It's our first one that I've done in quite a while, so it'll probably be even less technically proficient than normal. So today, Engineering with Rosie Live is in collaboration with John Poljak, founder of Keynumbers. Hi, John.
Hey, Rosie. How's it going?
Good. The motivation for this live stream was the attention that nuclear power has been getting recently in Australia since the opposition released its list of 7 sites that it wants to put nuclear power plants on. I'm going to assume most people watching, especially at this time of day, from Australia, but for those who aren't and don't know, Australia doesn't have nuclear power, and it's currently illegal both federally and in most of the individual states, I think, as well. And I had a video on the channel recently called 4 Reasons Why Nuclear is a Bad Idea for Australia. Oh, actually, I think why it's a dumb idea for Australia, a little bit provocative. And in that video, also when I posted it on LinkedIn, and it actually got shared a bit on Twitter, and people have a lot of opinions about the numbers that I used in that analysis. And in general, I think that is a real feature about debate about nuclear power, more so than other energy technologies. That, a lot of people saying, oh, you chose super pessimistic numbers purposely to make nuclear look bad, or basically the opposite if you are opposed to nuclear. So John and I thought, hey, Keynumbers can easily, calculate based on any assumption. So let's just do the numbers that people want to see. And that's what we're going to be doing live today. So before we get to that, I would love to hear in the comments where you're watching from. And if you have any assumptions related to nuclear power that you want tested, then put it in the comments because, we'll try and run through everything. I also need to mention the sponsor of these live streams, which is WeatherGuard Lightning Tech. WeatherGuard makes strike tape a retrofittable lightning protection system for things that go fast, like wind turbine blades and aircraft. Okay, so I might start just with the post that I made about nuclear originally that got me kind of thrust into talking about nuclear. I talk about nuclear constantly these days. I don't know about you, John, but for me, it's like the main energy technology that I'm talking about the last couple of weeks.
Yes, it's a trending topic at the moment, but hopefully the Kardashians will come back online in a couple of weeks and we can get onto some real stuff. So, we'll see how the news cycle goes. But hopefully, if we can get the numbers right, we can explain to people why it makes sense or why it doesn't make sense, and that's the purpose of today.
For me too. Okay, so just going to share my LinkedIn post. I've shared this little short video about this nuclear power, a good idea for Australia. And so I've got 4 reasons why. First one, in the Australian context, nuclear is too slow to build because within a decade or so, a lot of people really queried that idea that I've said that Australia will have 90% renewable electricity within a decade. And I will accept that it could well be 5 years longer than that. The point remains the same, that by the time we manage to get a nuclear reactor operating in Australia, the energy transition would have mostly happened. Second, nuclear doesn't play nicely with wind and solar. So either nuclear or renewables need a dispatchable energy source like hydro, batteries, or gas peakers to match demand with generation minute by minute. When you combine nuclear with variable renewables, sounds like a match made in heaven, right? Like something really stable with something that, varies. But when people have actually studied it, they found that it doesn't actually decrease the amount of storage that you need by very much, if anything. Then point number 3, which is probably one that we will spend a lot of time talking about today, nuclear power is expensive. In Australian context, again, the nuclear cost estimates range from double to more than triple, and in some estimates, like a lot more than triple what renewables cost in Australia. And even if you include firming, and the basis for that is something that we're also going to talk about today. There was a CSIRO analysis, or they run it every year, looking at what the cost of different energy systems are. So they include like generation and storage that needs to go with variable renewables. And then the 4th point, because a lot of people criticize this video, they're like, oh, you say you've got nothing against nuclear, but then you just say how terrible it is. But it is really location specific. I don't have anything against nuclear in the places that have the kinds of problems that it solves, but nuclear solves problems that Australia doesn't have. We have so much rooftop solar in Australia that it's killed the need for base load. You know, there is no time of day when you reliably need a certain amount of energy. At times, rooftop solar meets nearly all, and in case of South Australia, meets all of their demand in the middle of the day. And our Dunkelflaute, the long periods without wind or sun, aren't as bad as people expect in Australia. We're so lucky there. It is very different to other countries. You know, you wouldn't be doing the analysis and getting the same answer in, you know, Sweden or Canada, for example. But in Australia, even our very worst ever winter month was still, I think, about 70% of the long run average. So Dunkelflaute in Australia usually just lasts a few hours and sometimes a day when you consider across the entire length of the Australian grid. So that's my bit. Mostly this live stream, to be honest, the value is all coming from John. So I want to, let's move on. And we need to get started on a couple of topics first. First of all, explaining a bit about the Australian energy system, and I think you're going to use CSIRO Gencost report, right, to explain that or ascribe the assumptions in that a bit. Because that's another thing that I've learned from all this online talk about nuclear recently, is that there's like a camp of people that think that CSIRO and the Australian Electricity Market Operator, AEMO, that they're in some sort of like lizard person conspiracy to, promote renewables and denigrate anything else. Thanks for that little pop-up. So I'll hand over to you. Actually, no, before I do that, let's just read some comments. First commenter, what have we got? I have to say it German because they're calling in from Germany, Zeugunzer, I guess. Then we've got another one from Cambridge, UK. So that's very interesting. Both countries that have had nuclear power, and lots of controversy surrounding those technologies in both of those countries. And then a bunch from Australia. So we've got Stephen Parker, New South Wales, Adnan from Victoria, Stephen Brickwood from Sydney. We've got Thailand represented. I've got a neighbour, Wiesler in Canberra. So let's get onto the meat of it. From you, John. And do you want me to bring up CSIRO Gencost report, or you got it handled with your?
I can just do the. Actually, what might be useful? Do you have the NEM, like a NEM chart handy, or
just like open NEM?
Just to show what the and just while that's opening, the German instance is actually quite interesting because they did a study on it, and there's a term called system conflict. There's a German version of that word, but they kind of foresaw that there is a difference between, you can't have nuclear and solar at the same time, because solar eats nuclear's lunch during the summer when it's really cheap, and that means you're either running at a low capacity factor, and then you've got gas on the other side, which is kind of like, so it's kind of, nuclear's kind of crunched between the two. Now, of course, Germany had the problem of they kind of threw out nuclear before they had a plan B, and then the gas stuffed them up. So, but I think what you're seeing is that most countries, if they have to, what you're looking for is nuclear and renewables both need some sort of storage, because nuclear just runs constantly. So you need something that peaks at 7 o'clock at night, or for a couple of weeks in the winter. So, and we'll get onto that in terms of like how that can be integrated into the grid.
Yeah, I know by now I know the playbook of so the angry response to that is, what about France? So I know that you're planning to talk about France later. So anybody who was, feel free to write that in the comments anyway. But that's under control. Yeah. Okay. So open NEM. Yes, I do have that open.
So just saying one thing with the NEM there, what you're seeing there is like Australian Australia's grid very peaky. So every day we're kind of 7 o'clock at night, we're switching on electricity. We've got a big band of coal and gas there at the bottom. But if you look at the ISP, which was just presented, they're expecting that to basically go in the next 9 years, which is roughly the time it takes to present to install nuclear. So you're in a situation where maybe today, if you could install it magically, you could kind of replace like for like. But again, the problem with that is that nuclear is a lot more cheaper, sorry, a lot more expensive than solar on a capex basis. So yeah, so that was just the quick one. I'll just give people a context of the grid, just to see that, you know, like you've got a lot of solar and wind coming in, and batteries is coming in there as well. So there's just kind of no real spot there for nuclear, maybe today, but in 9 years' time. And I've got a chart, I think, on the NEM in terms of what the system's going to look like in a few years. So
yeah, because our little battery sliver, it's not nearly as exciting as what we've been seeing coming out of California recently, but we have a lot under construction at the moment.
Exactly.
So, yeah, and, I think we have like 2 gigawatts, 10 gigawatt hours or something in construction.
And we should also highlight that Paul Martin commented today in today's post and all that. We're just like batteries are getting much cheaper, and you're in a situation where storage is not just the traditional kind of storage that's grid like utility scale. You're going to have millions of EV cars coming onto the grid, and each one of those can provide storage back to the power back to the network. So there's a lot of work around V2G. At the moment, it's kind of expensive, but in the future, I think it's a no-brainer to if you've already got a car, just use it for other purposes, and you save on all those capital costs.
Yeah, Stephen Brookwood in the comments commented on the batteries, and I don't know. I thought a lot of people, I'm super pro V2G and think it's going to make a big difference. And even like not V2G, but just smart charging. You know, just giving people an incentive to charge when there's solar power, and not do it in the evening peak when there's not a lot of electricity around. I think it will make a bigger difference than people think. So I'm looking forward to it.
And just on that, that's a good point, because a lot of the times, one of the things that we're going to see is like, you know, who's willing to change their habits, because a lot of the times, you know, are you willing to change your habits to get cheap, do the I don't know, like stuff around the house when electricity is cheap, and basically not, maybe you have to cook dinner a bit earlier or something like that. So you get a lot of people that are kind of like set in their ways, and sorry to say, but like, angry middle-aged men or grumpy middle-aged men, which I'm kind of like part of that thing where, sometimes we just don't want to change our habits. But in the future, you can easily see that there's benefits to kind of say plugging in your car, like even plugging in your car. People are like, oh, it's too much hassle. I want to use my petrol car and charge when I, put petrol in whenever I want. But why is it such a problem to change for 5 minutes a night to change your cars? So anyway, sorry, I'm digressing. But should I just share my screen?
I'll put it on. There you go.
Okay. Thanks for having me here. I run the Keynumbers website, so all the calculations that you see here will be publicly available, and you can play around and whir away later on whenever you want. And I'm just a small little kind of software developer doing this kind of stuff. A bit pro bono. If anyone wants to pay me, no problem.
Yeah, we should put a buy me a coffee link for John in the description.
Actually, I can sell a widget. So also, if you want to buy a widget from me for $10, no problems. So just to kind of give a sense of the, the first thing is that what's the levelized cost of electricity? And the definition of it really is that it's the revenue required to cover costs of constructing, fueling, maintaining, and financing a power plant, and still getting a profit for the investors. So a lot of people kind of look at like the sticker price of like a nuclear power plant, and they'll say billions of dollars, and then they'll just say, right, we've got 80 years worth of generation, divide one by the other, and you end up with like the unit cost. But what you've got to factor in is also that means 80 years of profit for the investor as well. So having a longer duration doesn't necessarily equal a basically lower average cost or substantially lower average cost of electricity. But effectively, take the total costs and the profits of the project, which effectively equals your revenue, divided by the energy production over the lifetime, and you end up with a levelized cost of electricity. But a lot of times what people are looking for is that they're saying, well, you're saying that solar's at $40 a megawatt hour, but can it achieve that $40 a megawatt hour? So then that's the big question, is like, is the revenue there to kind of like justify the project? What Rosie was saying in terms of the conspiracy theory, the lizards, this is anyone can go to the CSIRO website and download the spreadsheets that's behind the numbers. Now, sorry, if I can just kind of like, I'm just going to, see if I can just drag a report across. Okay. So like most Australian businesses and governments, all they do is outsource to consultants to actually do the work. So if you're looking at someone like CSIRO, all they've done is gone to Oricon, which is a big kind of engineering firm in Australia, and they said, give us the details behind all the cost estimates of all the different technologies. So this is just like, onshore winds, solar, et cetera, et cetera. So if you want to blame CSIRO, all they've done is kind of outsource the work to the experts. So a lot of the times you kind of, so just want to kind of like point out that it's not quite like, like there's some sort of quango in the back of the CSIRO who are kind of, thinking of the politics in terms of what the costs can be. Now, when they get those costs, all they're doing is just doing a simple formula. And what I mentioned, like take all the costs and all the revenues, costs and all the profits divided by the production, and you get your levelized cost of electricity. So this is the most controversial formula in Australia at the moment. So that's it. All they're doing is taking the capex cost, adding in, and I'll just kind of explain the formula. They're taking in a discount rate, which is basically what the investors expect, or kind of like, between investors and debt holders, adding all those costs together and dividing it by the production of what you're expecting from the power plant, and that gives you your levelized cost. And they've just broken it down by capital, fuel costs, O&M, and they've also incorporated a bit for CO2 storage for some CCS options, but again, it's quite minimal. So that's it. So that's what the big controversy is about. This is why we hire PhDs and scientists at CSIRO to do this little simple formula, and we all get upset about it. So just to kind of like alleviate the concerns, there's no real conspiracy theory, and this is just a straightforward, organizations around the world, such as the US Department of Energy, and I'm sure there's organizations in Europe that would do something similar to this. Okay, so that's just the basics and all that. Okay, so I'm just going to jump across here. Sorry, over here. And sorry, I'm just going to show, it was a bit last minute, so just a rush. So a big question is that that's the cost of power, but can you get the revenue for it? So I did this post on LinkedIn ages ago. And what it means is that we can look at in terms of, and this comes down to Rosie's question, I think, about, like can nuclear and solar and wind coexist? So the big question is that can they provide electricity during premium time, or when you can kind of equate that to when's the electricity price high? Can the power systems actually deliver at those high price times? Now the usual thing is that only solar can do it at the middle of the day, so you only have like so you're going to get a cheap price, whereas a peaker plant is going to be delivering electricity at a high price, so you'll like that. So I'm just going to quickly show this quick. It just runs for about 30 seconds. So this is the oops.
Do you need the sound?
Oh no, there's no sound. So this is in 2022 when prices were high. The average price of electricity was $183 a megawatt hour, but only 12% was actually, this is the spot price in New South Wales. And you can see that a lot of it was sold at a much cheaper price, and a lot of it was sold at a much higher price, so $300 plus for 15%. Now I'll just stop it there. That's coal. So basically coal's chugging along and it's running at the time. So whenever, if the price is high or the price is low, coal's just doing its thing. You can see here, this is gas. So gas is waiting basically for the big bucks. So it's coming along and saying, all right, I'm basically gonna, if you were to measure when gas was running and what the spot price was at those times, it got $400 a megawatt hour in 2022. And that's I actually use specific like NEM, generators. So that's URN Quinty. Sorry, apologies, I can't pronounce it properly. So the big question is that then everyone's like, oh, dispatch, renewables are crap because they can't get the right, they're not providing electricity at valuable times. And you can see here solar, okay, it's basically selling when it's really cheap. So it's selling a lot more. Sorry, just kind of make this a bit bigger. So it's selling what it's like, it's very, very cheap. So you think, oh, well, that's the low value electricity. But then you get to wind, and what you find is wind's awesome because basically it runs in the evening and the mornings. So you'll know about, I guess Rosie's the wind expert, so she'll know when wind is running. But you've got a long coastline, and wind's coming in the evening or going in the morning, and it's basically capturing a lot of this revenue at the top. It's very similar to what the grid's requiring. So
Yeah, and can I just intervene to say that if you did this same thing for offshore wind, if we had any, then you would get even more skewed to the right. Those are the sites where people are building it. So that's the answer to why bother building more expensive offshore wind. But it's just a little diversion. Go back to what you're doing.
Yeah, because what you're seeing is that you're not trying to, you're not trying to provide electricity at a consistent, capacity or production rate throughout the day. You're trying to match when people are demanding it, and wind's fantastic at that. So, and what you see in the ISP is that they're trying to build a lot more onshore wind to kind of I assume to kind of match when people need it, and then plug in the gaps when you have those kind of small little lulls in the winds. So that just gives you a sense of how does nuclear fit into that? When the problem is that in the middle of the day, this is what I mean. This is what Rosie I assume was meaning by renewables and nuclear cannot play well together. During the middle of the day, solar is always going to be cheaper. So it's just always going to basically win the bidding war against nuclear, unless nuclear sells below cost. And then at high times, you're either going to hit peaker power, like gas peaker plants, or wind power, which will also basically match those when people actually want it better. So it's kind of, it doesn't, in the Australian context, it doesn't really fit that well. So that was just the kind of the peaking power. I just wanted to kind of, sorry, maybe just last one, and then we can get into the questions and stuff. So just getting back to what Rosie was talking about in terms of what's the cost of electricity, and is the CSIRO kind of providing reasonable estimates? Because there's a big hoo-ha. You had the federal opposition leader basically point blank saying that he doesn't trust the numbers, and kind of intimating that maybe the CSIRO is overestimating the costs. So what I did was I looked at all the costs of all different projects. See if I can make that a bit bigger. And this is where CSIRO's project estimates for a nuclear power plant is sitting against projects across the world. So they're actually sitting at a really, really cheap rate compared to say Flamanville, which is in France, which is a bit of a disaster project. I think that's been taken 20 years to build. Vogel in the US, also another first of a kind. And the usual thing is that people will say, oh, it's a first of a kind. Of course, it's going to be expensive, and if you and that's a relative. You can make a point if you go down to say Korea, which is down here. You got this KEPCO Shin-Kori 5 and 6 plants, which is down almost just at $2,500 a kilowatt. Oh, sorry, I apologize. I think I converted this to Australian dollars. So what the Koreans did was they said, right, we're going to build a lot of power plants in a sequence. So we're going to learn from our first mistakes. We're going to learn from the first few and build them again and again and again. So that's their strategy, and they've been relatively cheap for Korea, for the Korean side things. And the CSIRO report actually has it in their Gencost, in their kind of, you go to the frequently asked questions. They said, how did you get this number of about $8,500 a kilowatt? And what they did was they basically took, of course, we don't have any nuclear power plants to estimate the cost. So what they did, they said, how much does it cost to build a coal-fired power plant in Australia? How much does it cost to build a coal-fired power plant in Korea? And the ratio was about 2.8 times more in Australia compared to the Korean one. So they just went, we'll just use the same logic for nuclear. But again, what CSIRO is doing, and they've been very clear in what their report's saying, is that they're assuming that you're building this continuously. So there's no kind of half-hearted attempts to kind of just build one or two. And you're seeing in the Liberal Party policy, I think they went with 5 nuclear power plants, large-scale ones, and 2 SMRs. So the question is on those SMRs, can you really be serious about driving the cost down for an SMR if you're only building 2 of them in Australia? So that's just a question that needs to be kind of highlighted for that side of things. Okay. And just in terms of the cost, so a big question is that what does this mean, this, $8,500 a kilowatt? What does it mean? We get called billions and billions of dollars. We get shown billions and billions of dollars and big scary numbers. So what we can see here is that if we're just to look at the construction cost, how much does that impact electricity prices? That $8,000 for 30 years would give you $37 a megawatt. So that's the cost of just the construction part. Doesn't include financing, doesn't include fuel or or O&M. And again, what you see here, I'm using a capacity factor of 89%, which is on the high side. If we went lower, of course, the costs go, if we go down to say 60%, I think we had a low estimate of 58%. As you can see, it's $56. But again, it's a very cheap cost. It's not really that much. The big shock is when you get the financing charges and a bit of O&M. That's when it really hits you and all that. Okay. Okay. Should I just keep on maybe?
Well, let's. I don't want to go too far without pulling back to some comments, but because there's some that are relevant to what you've just said. So, for example, Grant Chalmers says, as I understand it, Gencost assigns zero value beyond 30 years, even though nuclear is still churning out clean energy and will for another 20 to 40 years. So I mean, that's a really, maybe even the most common criticism of this. And I mean, it uses conservative, mostly when you see calculated LCOE values, they are using conservative values for all technologies. I think it's not just nuclear, but it's on the low side. But yeah, can you just let's just see what happens when you change that number.
Okay, so what happens is that we'll just go back to the construction time of 6 years. So that the idea is that if you take out the fuel cost and the O&M, what you get is about $114 a megawatt hour. That's the cost of just the capital cost plus the financing at 6%, and that's at 89%.
So assuming that your fuel is free.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So if we would increase that to say $80. So let's say we're doing it to say 60 years, which is effectively we're doubling the time. We should see a halving of the simplistic way of looking at it is we should see a halving of the levelized cost. So let's just change that to 60. And we don't see, sorry, did I go the right way? My fault. Sorry. We've gone from 30 years. And if we increase the time to 60 years, we should see that down to about $60 a megawatt hour. But we don't see that going down to $60 a megawatt hour. We only see it going down about $10, $15 a megawatt hour.
Yeah. So why is that? Because I think that most people would be like, that's wrong. Your calculator's broken. If you've got your same piece of kit, it's making electricity for twice as long, it costs half as much. Obviously, why is the instinctive obvious answer not correct?
Yeah, because what the LCOE is saying is that this is the revenue I need to get in order to basically pay my costs and get a return. But if you're saying I want revenue in 30 years in the future, the revenue is worth, how could I say, the value of that revenue 30 years in the future is worth less than revenue today. And what you see is that because it's worth less, it basically effectively, how can I say, it has less impact on cost, if I could put it that way. Maybe if I can do it, yeah.
Can I just do the equivalent comment from the other side? What about the cost to decommission a nuclear power plant? Because that has the same answer, right? It's the same concept that's relevant, this time cost of money, where if you say, I'll give you $1 million today, that's worth a lot more to me than if you say, I'll give you $1 million in 50 years time. I'm like, well, that's actually not that valuable to me.
Oh, I forgot to update the record. I had a calculator for it. Hang on, if you just give me a second, I might take a bit of people are logging into the system. So usually these calculations for the LCOE of nuclear power don't include the cost to decommission and often not the cost to dispose of nuclear waste at the end, because I understand usually nuclear waste is stored on site for the duration of the project's life, and then afterwards has to be taken somewhere else. Very, very expensive and tricky to do that. But usually they don't assign any value to that in LCOE, which sounds like giving nuclear an easy ride. But can you explain? Yeah, I need to, if I can find here we go, decommissioning cost. Sorry, it's just going to be the model. Oh, apologies, it's going to look a bit funny.
People can get into all these screens themselves, is that right? Or some
of them? Yeah, they can get into all of them. I kind of make them, sorry, it looks a bit funny. Just to kind of explain, let's say, for example, you've got a decommissioning cost of $25 billion. Now, what that cost means at the moment, what an economist would say, or a bean counter in an energy company would say, that cost to me today is only $800 million. Because what you're actually saying is that costs 60 years in advance. I'm using my future profits to pay it off. So I'm basically going to eventually accumulate that up to $25 billion after 60 years. But today, that $25 billion liability is only worth $800 million. So if we were to kind of like say it's worth, like say it's only 20 years, then that still about a third or a quarter would be the, so basically the reason why you don't see it in the Lazard report or the CSIRO is because, okay, like, you know, it's a double-edged sword. With you go to 60 years and say the plant lasts 60 years, then that cost basically is irrelevant for finance, say for investment purposes. It's relevant for, you know, you don't want radiation in the atmosphere, and you need to bury it, and it's going to cost you a lot of money to decommission that plant. But from a finance perspective, it's not very relevant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a good answer. All right. So what's next?
Any other questions, or is it just? Or
Yeah,
I can go on
to
the
other questions. So there's a few technical ones which you know, I can answer a little bit, but I'm not the definitive expert on nuclear technology. But don't nuclear plants need refurbishing every 30 years or so? I mean, there's O&M included, right? Operations and maintenance. I know that they should be including, if you had a lifetime further than that, you would need to include that in the value. But
even that, if you say like, right, you need to say, I'll say $10 billion 30 years in the future, it's only worth 100, you know, oh, sorry, that's only $1 billion. I think I just forgot a zero. It's not such a big, there's a thing called subitizing, which is, our brain actually only remembers the numbers can only recognize 1, 2, 3, and 4, and everything goes into a bucket called lots. So everything, there's a great book on it. We can put in the comments. And so $10 billion is only worth $2 billion 30 years in the future. So it's not really. So even a refurbishment cost is not really like a big issue for the costs. Could I maybe just go just one thing? I think there was a few comments on what happens if it takes longer than expected.
Yeah.
The CSIRO does actually capture the number of years, the construction time. So they assume it's 6 years.
And that's good. I mean, that's definitely, I pulled out those recent stats for the video that I did. Where have I got it? Sorry, now I've got a delay. Yeah, so the average of recent years is nine years. That includes some like really, really long blowouts, and it includes some faster. So, and that's just for construction. So obviously in Australia, we need to do some things before we can start constructing. Some countries are building reactors faster than the 9-year average. China's recent plants have taken 5 to 9 years. But others like the US and the UK are taking longer. And yeah, there's the US and UK examples of them taking much, much longer. But the thing that I was really, I think is really important to take into consideration is when you look at all nuclear power plants and like do the stats on it, it's a project type that is really prone to cost overruns, and the definitive source on really big projects and how they've fared in their execution is Bent Plubia, who's written this book, How Big Things Get Done. And in his analysis, he has 191 nuclear power projects. And of those large number, 93% of them took longer than expected to complete. And the mean schedule overrun was 65%. So, yeah, I mean, 6 years would be... That's so optimistic for Australia, right?
Can I tell you my hang on, I'll just quickly mention that like this 6 years, let's go to 12 years. So just say it doubles because we rushed it and forgot to do the planning. So that went from, that's 138, so that's 98. So that's added an extra 50% to the cost, or 40% to the cost, just by delaying it by 6 years. That's not increasing the actual cost of the production of the facility. It's just literally delaying it. Now, of course, that's the formula that they use. And normally engineers would use S-curves, and they'd say, right, for the first few years, even if you're delayed, you've hardly spent any money. But it's a high-risk project, and then someone's... and what you're seeing also is, like, for example, with Hinkley C, they basically are well behind schedule. But for their next, I think it's Sizewell is their next plant they're planning to use. And what they're doing, EDF, is, or what they propose is actually to start getting people to prepay the cost of it now. But could you imagine going to the Australian public and saying, right, do you want to prepay your electricity 20 years in advance or 12 years in advance to pay for, electricity for... So there's a whole bunch of equity issues in there as well in terms of who's funding these projects now.
And also, when in Australia, you can prepay your next 20 years of electricity by putting rooftop solar on your roof and putting in a home battery. And I mean, that's another thing. It's just so different between Australia and other countries that might be the right way to go when you have a long, dark, harsh winter where you need a lot of heating and your solar panels are producing nothing. Then that's where you do, take the hit of nuclear is a tricky technology to get right, and it's in those kinds of countries where they don't have choice, or they don't have many choices, and that's just not us in Australia, I think.
I published one. I didn't put in the presentation, but I published a diagram of how many solar panels Europe would need to replace gas. Sorry. How many solar panels would Europe need to generate hydrogen to replace natural gas? And of course, we all know that hydrogen is very inefficient, but it's literally covering countries. It's just like they just don't physically have that space in Europe to be able to do that. So yeah, in a place where you don't have space, it makes sense to go with a high energy density power generation system, or that doesn't take up too much space. Okay. I guess just there's also a question in terms of the investor returns, like, they use 6%. So just to kind of quickly say that if you go down to I think we'll just go to 156 to 175. So it's about $20 a megawatt. So you're talking like, so every percent, so as interest rates rise, it's an extra $20 a megawatt. Now, to put that in context, solar is only $40 a megawatt in total. So just a simple interest rate change could impact the cost of this project quite significantly. So just to you can play around with the assumptions on this one. And I use the Sydney property as a good example, but that's a big thing where why would you want to Australia's got a history of just investing in banks and property because the returns are great. So how does nuclear attract those funds in order to develop the projects? And this is where they come into it from saying it's going to have to be a government-run project because there's just no way no one's going to, investors in superannuation funds have got better things to do with their money.
All right, can we move on to flexibility? That's a question that a lot of people are asking about, flexibility or variations of that. So this one, another Elvis, who I think I recall from an earlier comment, is watching from Denmark, and I don't know if that's Denmark, Western Australia, or Denmark, the country. Fun fact, when I lived in Denmark, my electoral forms, to vote, they got sent to me via Denmark in Western Australia before they made it to me in Denmark, the country. Anyway, another Elvis asks, how fast can you decrease or increase the power output of a nuclear power plant? What are the timescales? And so, yeah, I've said in my analysis, I've said how, nuclear, it prefers to run constantly, and there are technology reasons why that it prefers that, but there's also economic reasons why. And then whenever I say that, yeah, nuclear doesn't really like to ramp up and down quickly, and I think in my video I showed I showed OpenNEM, Australia's electricity grid, and showed how the non-variable part, what you might like to call baseload if you're thinking old school, it varies. Like the amount of power in that kind of bottom section is only 50% of what it is in the top section. So, if nuclear is making up a big proportion of your grid, it would want to be ramping up and down, maybe half and then full and then half and then full, or at least something close to that, which we don't see. And then the common response to that is, yeah, well, what about France? France has got, like about 70% nuclear. They're managing it. So yeah, please, John, talk us through what's going on there. So I
just went to ENSO, which is it's the grid operator in Europe, and they've got all the statistics on the hourly generation by generation type per country. So what I did was I downloaded a year's worth of information. I just picked July 23 to June 24, so it's relatively relevant. And I just looked at the nuclear generation, and don't worry about the percentages there. What I was trying to say is that if I just sorted it by least variable per day, so how much does the nuclear move on a daily basis between the minimum amount of nuclear generated that day and the maximum. So I just went off basically the 100% is like what's the minimum off the minimum. So you can see here about half the time, I'd say even 60% of the time, France's nuclear generation fleet hardly moved between 10% each day. So it's hardly, it's not very flexible. And then as you're going into maybe like a third of the time, yeah, it's getting up to about say 20% to 30%. So if it's generating 30 gigawatts per day, it might be generating 40 gigawatts by the end of the day. So they're controlling that by basically shutting down. They're not really kind of varying every nuclear power plant. They're just basically shutting down part of the fleet. And then the right-hand side here. Mm-hmm.
No, you go. I'll say when you.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, and then just on the right-hand side, you can see it basically. The variance between the minimum and the maximum for the day is quite a lot. So it's either a maintenance job or they're shutting down a lot at one time for whatever various reasons. So possibly, yeah, they're using that for a bit for flexibility. But throughout the year, it's a stable base load way of generating electricity. So, and this is actual numbers. This is not me kind of making hypothetical. This is just
So let's relate that back to Australia. Like France is able to run so stable because they're connected to all sorts of other electricity grids that aren't trying to run a nuclear power fleet at 70% capacity factor. So Australia, we don't have the option to just export power to our neighbours, at least not easily. Very hard to export electricity from Australia. And maybe another topic, you've just brought it up now. There's this tension, right, between either if you're being very flexible, then you're going to harm your capacity factor. But now I think that you're about to explain exactly what that means.
So what we see, this is coming from the World Nuclear Association, that every year they they produce a performance report, which kind of identifies per country what the capacity factors are for each country. So we're seeing France here. They're down to only 60% capacity factor. So a lot of their fleet's either out or kind of I wouldn't say it's even ramping. As we saw, the majority of the year, they're not really ramping up and down. So this is just the fleet's down. They're not using it very often. And you can see here the age of the fleet down the bottom here. It's getting older and older and older. So it just goes to the fact that as it's getting older, it's getting a bit less, say, reliable. Now, at the moment, CSIRO specified 89% capacity factor, and that gets us to $156 a megawatt hour. Now, just to kind of go back to Rosie's point of 2 to 3 times the cost of electricity for nuclear, CSIRO had, I think, about like between 40 and 60 for the cost of wind and solar. Now, if we go down to 60%, what does that do to the cost of electricity? So it's gone from 156 to 223. You've got a massive amount of capex that you need to pay off, and you just don't have enough electricity generating at 60% to pay it off. So suddenly your costs go up. So as per LCOE, what you're saying is that I need to generate my electricity. I need to sell my electricity now at 223 for 60% of the time in order to pay off the costs and get a return on investment for the investors. Or if you got the government there, then just suck it up and they can just tax everyone and pay it by that way.
Yeah, well, here's a comment related to that. I don't want to get too political on this, but maybe it's not political. From Rick Walters, won't nuclear simply be paid for by the government, taxpayer funded? Won't it simply operate continuously and not have to bid into the energy market? It just reduces demand. And I think that's the current plan. It is related to another point that people often say about France that they have quite cheap electricity bills, but yeah, again, like if your government pays for your energy, then you don't see it on your bill, but it doesn't mean that you're not paying for it. So it's really hard to look at electricity bills and have that say anything about the cost of the the whole system.
Can I, just on that point from Rick, I just got this little chart. This is how the NEM works in terms of a bid stack. So the idea is that, I mean, you can say what your costs are, but at the end of the day, you've got to sell it at the price cheaper than everyone else in order to kind of use it. So the way, just to kind of quickly explain how the spot market works, is that everyone's kind of putting their bids in, and you're saying, right, okay, let's say I've got, I don't know, I want 10 gigawatts of electricity. Everyone's putting their bids in, and the cheapest one comes in first. So the way the system works is that, imagine you're a solar farm. You're saying, right, I've already spent my money. I'll just get whatever I want for it. As long as I pay my variable costs, I'll bid whatever price. So they're bidding very low. So you're seeing that solar and wind will bid basically at very low prices, so they'll get in first. Then after that, if there's still more demand that hasn't been met, then maybe like you'll get like, say, like a gas peaker to kind of come in and top it up. And if the gas peaker can't meet it, then suddenly the price goes up through the roof until demand drops off. That's what you're seeing. That's what, when you're seeing your $1,000 a megawatt hour for 5 minutes or $10,000 or whatever. That's when it's suddenly like, that's what it's doing is increasing the price so high that demand, people just go, I've got to switch off my power. My industries have to switch off because it's just too expensive. So this is what I mean by like the cost of electricity to the residential people and to industry will be based on, do we have enough capacity at those times to pay off, to bring the price down? If there's not enough capacity, or we haven't planned properly, then the prices are going to shoot up. So it doesn't matter what the technology is, if it's solar or wind or gas. If you don't have enough, it's just the price is going to go through the roof. So we've got to watch out that this comes down to the system cost part of things. We can't just look at the individual generator driving down a cost. It's do we have enough generation capacity on the network to pay it off? Sorry, just on the cost of like gas, and people go, why is it so expensive? Maybe like one generator works for 1% of the time. At that 1%, it needs basically $1,100 a megawatt hour in order to make a profit. And you've got generators out there that just sit there waiting for these opportunities when the price goes through the roof, and then it switches on. And we have to remember that when it hits that, it's like 1,100, so this one gets at the top, all the other bidders get it as well. So the wind gets it, the solar gets it, so all the bidders of that 5 minutes will get that price. Yeah. Dave Smith's a good one to watch on LinkedIn, and Paul McCardle. They're onto this subject quite a lot. I quite enjoy listening or reading up on their comments.
Yeah, I actually, we're running out of time, but I did want that actually ties into an answer to one of the questions that we had. That's a little bit of a tangent, actually. But think, John, if there's one more thing that you want to quickly talk about before we wrap up, and I'll just answer this question from Grant Chalmers. He says, we recently had a long wind drought in Southeast Australia, and I think it's still kind of ongoing. I pulled up David Osmond. He runs this simulation. I've had him on the show before. He runs a simulation of what if we had like highly variable renewable grid, how would it have performed in the last week? And the long run average was up over 99% until a few weeks ago when we had this wind lull and it started being more challenging. So yeah, last week it only managed 85%. The week before that it was only 85%. And so that's kind of like a nice, easy, gentle way into. Oh, I'm not showing my screen. I just realized. You can see his simulations on Twitter about how if we just had the same type of wind and solar that we have now, but just much more of it, and with actual demand, how would that have gone? And it's been bad recently. But yeah, speaking of Paul McCardle, what clarity is the source for the answer?
Yeah, their work's awesome. Just on that 5% thing, we have to be aware that it doesn't mean 5% per day. It means 5% of the time per year. So if you think about it, 5% of 365 days a year, that's what, 17, 18 days? where you could be running at full tilt gas. So when we're talking like these Dunkelflauters, or like these wind lulls, yeah, you might have 3 or 4 days or even a week. But again, we've got like I said, you could think of it as like, do we have like a wind lull budget? And that would be 17 full days where there was no wind or solar for those 17 days. Now, of course, you might have wind, but you might not have wind, but you have solar. That budget then becomes 30 days because you're using not 5% of the time, you're using 2.5% per day for 30 days. So
yeah. So I mean, that's the answer to the question about what about the wind drought. I mean, it's not an unprecedented wind drought by any means. In the video that I did, the 4 Reasons video, I included a reference to some research that looked at the last 42 years of weather data in Australia and how long the wind droughts actually are. And so you can go have a look at that. And, the one that we're having now, or maybe we've finished it now, fits within that. It's still not, unprecedented. And the answer is that you need something for those times. Those are the times when you either don't have a 100% renewable grid or you're using green hydrogen. But nuclear isn't very good for filling in those once a decade kind of things either. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
As we're getting just a couple final things in terms of the system cost that has got me scratching my head. We had this issue when we last did a live stream, and a really simple thought experiment is just to go like an LCOE is just saying, what's the cost of the generator divided by the total production of that generator? You can do a system version of the levelized cost of electricity. Just total up all the generation in a grid, all the production assets. Sorry, all the generation assets. I haven't included generation in here, but but theoretically, like if you were to say, right, okay, like just total up all the costs of and I've included nuclear in there as well, so I'll go with that. Let me just go with that for a second. So that gives you basically, if you were to build a brand new NEM today, the ISP's actually told you what they need in 2040. You basically get the numbers from CSIRO on a per kilowatt basis. And I think that's the gigawatt, the number of megawatt hours. You get $300 billion. Now, the ISP's also told you that in 2040, there's going to be 400 terawatt hours a year of generation. It'll go up a bit more. That gives you, over the lifetime, let's assume 25 years, that means that's $10 billion. Sorry, $10 billion. Sorry, that shouldn't be a dollar sign. That should be just a comma. My fault. That gives you the total amount of generation over the life of that, over the next 25 years. Take the total cost divided by the total amount of production over 25 years, and you get to about with $30 a megawatt hour. That's the cost that that's the simplistic cost of the system cost that we can see for the NEM in 2040. Add in financing, $57 a megawatt hour. A bit for OMN for 3% gives you about $20, 78. And now I haven't included fuel costs for a bit of gas. You're mostly looking at a system cost, plus of just the production side of things, of $100 a megawatt hour. If you include, I might have to just quickly go through. Did I put it in here? Oh, sorry, transmission. This is we'd used this one before, but you can see in here, your electricity bill at 30 cents a kilowatt hour is made up of roughly, like a third for production, a third for distribution and transmission, and a third for other stuff like retail and stuff like that. So you're within the cost of the current wholesale cost at $100. $100 a megawatt hour is like 10 cents a kilowatt, which is roughly in line with what you're paying at the moment, or like roughly that. So you're not talking. So this whole thing of we've got a grid that's like a huge amount of renewables in there with storage. When you divide it by the total production, it's actually not that much. So of course, this is just the plan. So whether the market can actually achieve this plan and make money, that's for the AEMO to kind of monitor through their programs.
Yeah, if we can actually build all these projects and all the transmission that we need, that kind of mundane thing seems to be the challenge at the moment. Yeah. Okay, we're gonna have to. Yeah, sorry. One last.
Just to let you know, this we can put the link of the public page in here, and it'll actually have the actual the live stream video embedded in there, so people can watch the video and then play with the numbers whenever they feel like.
Yeah, that's that's the coolest thing about this, is that people can get in and do it themselves, and you can always trust something much more when you put in something that you know and you get the expected answer, and then change things. And I find it a much more intuitive understanding by doing it myself than from just taking CSIRO reports word for it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks a lot. We could always talk for longer. Heaps of people tuning in for a live one, especially the time of day. It's going to be mostly Australians watching, probably the most comments that we've ever seen. Heaps of comments about small modular reactors, and I am planning a video on SMRs, and maybe the same video, maybe separate video on in advanced reactor designs. I don't know why I've got so much nuclear content in the pipeline at the moment. I complain about talking about it all the time, but got lots of content plans. So keep an eye out for them. And I just need to once again thank the sponsor, WeatherGuard. They also have a great tech newsletter and a podcast that I co-host with Alan Hall and Joel Saxon each week, and the links are in the description. We talk about all kinds of clean energy tech news. The latest episode actually has a really interesting technology in it. There's a company that's got this approach where they're trying to use the carbon within structures, so carbon fiber in a wind turbine blade, for example, to actually store electricity, like use it as a battery.
What?
So yeah, it's kind of a bit funny. There's not too many details out there, but in the podcast episode we talk through how that might work and whether it's a good idea, and some of the challenges they might face. It's not the first place I would think to store electricity in something that's rotating around. It's a big pain to get electricity in and out of a wind turbine blade. But anyway, so check that out. Thanks as always to the Engineering with Rosie Patreon team, and you can sign up. The link is in the description. Thanks mostly to John, and send him a donation, because provides this public service for free. Have you got a link on Keynumbers where you can donate, or if you don't,
get in contact with me.
Yeah. Or if you need Keynumbers services, then get in touch. But
Yes.
thanks so much. This has been a really good one, and I've really loved reading the comments as well. I've been especially busy today, so. See you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.